Laura had always been inexplicably attracted to antique objects. Working as a restorer was not just her job but a passion she had nurtured since childhood. One day, while attending an auction of rare items, her gaze was immediately drawn to an unusual mirror. The frame was made of aged gold, adorned with engravings that seemed to tell a story, yet the reflective surface had something different about it. It looked alive. The auctioneer briefly mentioned that the piece had once belonged to an abandoned mansion over a century ago. Curious and intrigued, Laura placed her bid and won the auction. As she took the mirror home, she felt a mix of excitement and unease, as if something deep down in her soul knew this object was more than it appeared to be. That very night, while organizing her latest treasure in her studio, Laura sensed something strange. The reflection in the mirror seemed darker, more dense than the room around it. She came closer, examining every detail, convinced she'd seen something move in the deep corners of the reflection. Shrugging it off, she chalked it up to exhaustion and went to sleep. In the following days, however, the events intensified. Objects in the studio changed places, lights flickered for no apparent reason, and the mirror itself seemed to call Laura with an irresistible pull. Whenever she passed by it, she sensed a presence, something she could not explain. Determined to learn more about the origin of the mirror, Laura dove into research. She sifted through old archives, contacted experts in historical artifacts, and even reached out to online forums dedicated to the supernatural. What she discovered was chilling. The mirror had a tragic history, with each previous owner reporting experiences of fear and madness before mysteriously disappearing. Despite her growing apprehension, Laura felt an inexplicable connection with the mirror. It was as though it held the answers she needed to find, truths that could change her life forever. Resolute, she decided to face the unknown, unaware that she was about to cross the line between reality and a world of unimaginable horrors. Late that same night, Laura awoke in a panic. A soft sound, almost like a whisper, echoed through her empty apartment. At first, she thought it was the wind, but as she got up and walked by the studio, she realized the noise came from the mirror. She hesitated for a moment before moving closer. The room was dim, lit only by pale moonlight through the windows. The reflection looked different, deeper, as if she was staring into a dark lake instead of glass. The moment her eyes locked onto the mirror, something changed. A shapeless figure began to emerge slowly from the reflective surface, like a shadow taking form. Laura's heart pounded. She instinctively stepped back but could not look away. The figure seemed to be watching her, its outlines growing sharper by the second. "Help me," the whispered voice echoed, distant yet clearly audible. A chill ran down Laura's spine. She blinked rapidly, and the figure disappeared as swiftly as it had appeared. For a moment, she wondered if she had imagined everything, but the sound of that voice lingered in her mind like a scar. In the days that followed, Laura avoided the studio as much as possible. The mirror, however, seemed to have a magnetic force pulling her back. Every time she entered the room, she felt compelled to look at it, unable to resist its silent summons. One afternoon, while attempting to restore an old trunk, Laura had a strange feeling. She sensed she was not alone. Turning around, she saw something out of the corner of her eye. The blurred figure stood once more in the mirror, but this time it moved as though desperate, trying to cross the surface. The voice returned, clearer this time. "Please, help me. I'm trapped." Fear and compassion swirled inside Laura. Who, or what, was trying to communicate with her? Could it be a soul trapped in the mirror, or something far more sinister? Despite her doubts and her instinct to run away, she decided to ask questions. "Who are you?" Her voice trembled, barely audible. The answer was immediate, but fragmented. Victim, mirror, dangerous. Don't trust." The message was cut off by a shrill sound that made Laura cover her ears. When she looked again, the figure had vanished, but a strange mark had appeared on the mirror's surface, a symbol she had never seen before, resembling a blend of ancient runes and unknown engravings. Determined to uncover its meaning, Laura took a photo and began to research. The more she read about the mirror, the more she found stories of people who had vanished or gone insane after interacting with it. Some texts suggested the mirror was a portal to another realm, accessible only to those possessing a strong spiritual connection. Her fear continued to grow, but so did her curiosity. Something at the back of her mind warned her to destroy it, yet a powerful force prevented her from doing so. She felt she had to dig deeper, to discover the truth hidden within the mirror. That evening, Laura decided to do something risky. She sat in front of the mirror for a long time, observing it and trying to communicate with whatever existed on the other side. Beside a single lit candle, she stared into the reflection, patiently waiting for a response. After hours of silence, something finally happened. The mirror began to vibrate faintly, and the figure reappeared, more sharply than ever before. This time, it didn't seem merely trapped. It looked dangerous. "You have opened the door." The voice sounded cold and threatening. Before Laura could react, the candle went out, plunging the room into total darkness. That same night, the apartment was swallowed by darkness, which seemed to throb with oppressive energy. Laura froze, her heart pounding so loudly she could scarcely hear the sounds around her. The silence was broken by a faint scratching coming from the mirror, as if invisible nails were scraping the glass. With trembling hands, she lit the candle again. As its light swept across the studio, she noticed a change in the mirror. It wasn't just reflecting her face, there were now markings on the surface, words written in an ancient language, burned into the glass. Unsure of what they meant, she took a photo and sent it to a linguistics professor she knew from her research. While awaiting his reply, Laura examined the mirror more closely. Running her fingers over the cool surface, she felt a slight vibration, as though the object was alive. Hours later, the professor responded. He was as intrigued as she was and identified the text as a combination of Latin and archaic symbols used in occult rituals. Roughly translated, the phrase read, "He who looks too deeply shall see his soul reflected and his fears awakened." A chill ran down Laura's spine. It sounded like both warning and invitation, as if the mirror was daring her to continue. She tried to push away the notion, but her curiosity continued to grow. In the following days, events worsened. Laura heard voices not only in the studio but throughout the house. Objects fell inexplicably, and the shadows seemed to shift in the corners of each room. Every time she passed the mirror, she felt it watching her, awaiting the right moment to act. Still determined, she returned to her research. She learned the mirror had belonged to a collection of cursed artifacts that vanished during the 19th century. Ancient records revealed how each artifact's owner met inexplicable tragedies and descended into madness before disappearing. One name that repeatedly appeared stood out: the relics of Anku. According to legend, Anku was a figure associated with death and the supernatural, a reaper who collected lost souls. Laura realized the mirror was more than a simple portal. It was a trap, a conduit for capturing souls and binding them in a state between life and death. Armed with this knowledge, Laura sought help. She contacted a renowned medium named Sophia, known for handling supernatural cases. The moment Sophia stepped into the apartment, her reaction was immediate. "This mirror is dangerous," the medium said, her face pale. "There's something very old inside it, something not from this world." Sophia initiated a ritual to understand the mirror's energy. As she chanted in an unknown language, the mirror quivered and emitted a low moan. Suddenly, the surface clouded over, revealing a disturbing vision. Laura saw herself, but with a vacant, eerie stare. "You're connected to it," Sophia said urgently. "The mirror chose you for a reason. It reflects your fears, but also your strength. If you want to be free, you'll have to face it head-on." Laura had no idea what that meant, but something deep within her sensed Sophia was right. The mirror wasn't just a curse, it was a test. And to pass it, she'd have to face the darkest truths about herself. Before leaving, Sophia gave one final warning. "Be careful what you see. Not everything reflected belongs to our world, but everything you see can enter yours." From that night onward, Laura realized there was no escape. The mirror had chosen her, and she would have to find out why, before it was too late. Late into the night, Laura noticed a dense, almost palpable atmosphere suffusing every corner of her apartment. She felt as if the walls pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat, reflecting an ever-growing anxiety that had begun building from the moment she brought that ancient mirror into her life. That very day, after Sophia left her with a whirlwind of ominous thoughts, Laura realized she could no longer ignore the signs the object emitted. She had to confront, once and for all, the call coming from the other side of the reflective surface. As she made her way to the studio, the sensation of being watched intensified. The once innocuous shadows now seemed to track her every move, as though something beyond was quietly waiting for the precise moment to reveal its intentions. The studio door creaked ominously when Laura pushed it open, sending shivers coursing through her body from head to toe. The lamp's dim light barely illuminated the interior, enough only to highlight the mirror's dark shape against the far wall, exuding a strange presence that both attracted and repelled her. Summoning her courage, she slowly approached the mirror, experiencing a faint buzzing in her ears, as if another environment, another world, were vibrating in parallel to her own. She recalled Sophia's words, that the mirror could be both a trap and a path to free trapped souls. And in the center of it all was Laura, unwittingly connected to the artifact by a reason she had yet to uncover. Taking a deep breath, she placed her hand on the cold, intricately engraved metal of the frame. An impulse forced her to stare at her reflection. At first, she saw only her own pale face, marked by sleepless nights, but in seconds, the image began to warp. It was as if a ripple of water slid across the glass, and suddenly, a faint figure materialized there, watching her with hollow eyes. When that entity finally emerged in full, Laura gasped. It was no mere shadow but something nearly human, clad in old-fashioned clothing, its face taut from an agonizing lack of peace. And its voice, once distorted into whispers, now resonated clearly in her mind, speaking as if within her own thoughts. "You hear me now, don't you?" The shock made her recoil, but she could not look away. It felt as if the boundary between the physical and the supernatural was dissolving, and the mirror pulsed with such intense, almost suffocating energy. The call from beyond was like a chorus of discordant voices merging, each crying out for help or screaming in terror. Laura's stomach turned, overwhelmed by both empathy and dread. She sensed, somehow, that those souls were not free, and that the mirror was a gateway, or a prison, for each of them. Summoning whatever courage she had, she decided to speak. "Who are you?" Her voice thin, nearly lost in the deafening silence that followed. Still, the figure in front of her responded, introducing itself as Elias, claiming to be a previous owner of the mirror. He explained that, just like Laura, he had been drawn to its unusual beauty, but while trying to unravel its mysteries, he had become trapped in a realm where time and space did not function like in our world. The revelations came in fragments, weaving together into a terrifying story. Elias described that inside the mirror there existed a domain he called the Beyond, a place inhabited by ancient entities that feasted on human fear. Each time someone, driven by curiosity or ambition, tried to explore the hidden powers of the mirror, they risked having their soul captured in that desolate realm, serving as sustenance for darker forces that longed for vital energy. Elias, like many others, remained there in eternal torment, hoping that one day, someone might break the bond between the mirror and the beyond, setting them free. Laura listened in stunned silence, absorbing every word. Her mind reeled at the strangeness of it all. She now understood this was no mere cursed object, but a living portal that devoured energies of those who owned it. Sophia had been right to say the mirror had chosen Laura. By some means, perhaps her sensitivity or her inner strength, she had become the unintentional guardian of a passage between worlds. Now, confronted by Elias's pleas, she had to decide whether to try destroying the mirror, thus condemning those souls within, or search for a way to break the curse and face the beyond head-on. However, just when Elias began to discuss a potential way out, his figure was suddenly yanked back, as if something had grabbed him from behind the reflection. An invisible yet immensely powerful force dragged him into darkness, cutting off the connection. Laura felt a sharp tug in her own chest, as if part of her had been pulled away with him. The mirror rattled, and the surface quivered before returning to its usual stillness, showing only Laura's anxious face and the studio's dim light. The silence that followed roared like a contained scream. Though terrified, Laura sensed a new spark of determination within. She had to do something. For Elias and all the other souls trapped in that hellish dimension, including her own, which was endangered by every moment she remained bound to the artifact. Just then, she felt a gentle touch on her shoulder and nearly screamed as she turned around. To her astonishment, it was Sophia, who had returned to check on Laura. The medium brought with her an old grimoire whose yellowed pages and cryptic markings could hold the key to unraveling the spell. She said she had sensed a powerful presence bound to Laura, prompting her to come back out of concern. Sophia's arrival was a shard of hope amid chaos. Together, they pored over the grimoire, decoding ancient passages that spoke of portals, banishment rituals, and, most crucially, sacrifices that might end the curse. Each deciphered symbol amplified their sense of urgency. Laura was willing to do almost anything to prevent more souls from falling prey to the dark forces lurking within the mirror, though she feared what almost anything might entail. Risking her own life by entering the domain to rescue Elias. And even if she did so, would she be able to return? Sophia gravely explained that the only way to fully sever the connection between the mirror and the beyond was to confront the source of the curse directly. The dimension reflected by the mirror was described as an inverted world, where shadows fed off human emotions and gained form from the darkest fears. To free the trapped souls, one had to face the essence of that realm, referred to in the text as the guardian of reflections. The notion of stepping into an unknown, potentially lethal place chilled Laura, yet her conscience demanded she try. She could not live knowing more and more voices would cry for help, unanswered, each passing day. Holding Sophia's hand gave her a new wave of courage. She was no longer alone, and together they might break the chains that kept the artifact in eternal darkness, liberating the souls who cried out for redemption. As they prepared for the ritual, chanting in an ancient dialect from the grimoire, Laura felt as if she were taking a leap of faith into the unknown. She knew there would be no turning back. From now on, her fate was inextricably tied to the mirrors. Thus, the call from beyond became an unignorable invitation, dangerous and terrifying, but lit by a glimmer of hope that pierced the darkness of reflection. Laura's battle was only beginning, and right then and there, in that very studio, she took her first steps toward a confrontation that might cost her her sanity, her life, or even her very soul. Preparations for the ritual were in full swing when Laura and Sophia again found themselves in front of the mirror, now emitting an even heavier aura, as though every fraction of its fused metal carried the dormant consciousness of something ancient. The words in the grimoire Sophia flipped through seemed to resonate off the studio walls, throbbing at a supernatural frequency that made every hair on Laura's body stand on end. The tension was unbearable, yet at the same time it felt that the opportunity to finally grasp the mirror's full power was at hand. Laura clutched the piece of volcanic stone pressed against her chest, sensing a faint warmth radiating from its rough surface, like a heart beating in sync with her own. Meanwhile, Sophia, standing near the frame carved from dark, tarnished gold, carefully traced protective symbols on the floor with a peculiar chalk she insisted was a mix of sacred herb ashes and coarse salt. Each chalk stroke glowed faintly, like a newly struck match, and the circle it formed cast dancing shadows along the walls, a sinister ballet orchestrated by the mirror's own vibrations. Outside, the night lay in heavy silence, but inside the studio, echoes of voices rose, though no one else was physically present. Laura felt these voices vibrating in her mind, simultaneously confusing and desperate, like a crowd trying to convey a vital message all at once. Each second, the chorus of lamentation sharpened, until abruptly she could pick out sibilant whispers forming disjointed phrases. Names, cries for help, fragments of stories seemingly from diverse times and places. They were the voices of all who, at some point, had been devoured by the mirror. Their memories and personalities melded into a torrent of endless despair. Sophia noticed the horror etched across Laura's face and tried to calm her, gripping her hand tight. "Concentrate on your breathing," she advised, her voice trembling under the oppressive atmosphere, "for these voices will try to invade your thoughts. Remember that you hold the flame that can guide them back to the light." Courage was never something Laura believed she had in abundance, yet at that moment she felt a flame erupt in her chest, a resolve overshadowing her fear. She recalled Elias and the trust he had placed in her, the faith that she could somehow find a way to end the mirror's curse. Sophia then began a low chant in a language unknown to Laura, warming the air around them. The flickering candlelight in the room created a hypnotic reflection in the mirror's surface, and Laura thought she glimpsed a massive black door behind the glass, like the entrance to a sepulchral realm. The object emitted a hum of powerful, nearly suffocating energy. When Sophia finished her opening enchantment, the two women sat within the protective circle, facing each other while the mirror loomed large in the periphery. Sophia handed Laura the open grimoire, pointing to a marked page bearing a symbol resembling an eye entangled by serpents. "This is the seal of passage," she explained shakily. "To enter the reflected dimension, you must recite these words while gazing at your own image in the mirror. That will open the rift, but from that point forward, there is no easy way back. We'll have to seek the guardian of reflections and defeat him to free the souls imprisoned within." Laura swallowed hard, absorbing the implications. Entering that world would be akin to plunging into an abyss without a safety rope. Nevertheless, she raised her head, eyeing her reflection, which began to ripple across the mirror's surface like water in a twilight pond. She started to chant exactly as written, word by word, despite not fully understanding the archaic language's hidden meaning. The air thickened, taking on an almost electric quality, and it felt as though invisible gusts of icy wind came from nowhere, swirling about. Suddenly, a crimson flash tore through the mirror, like silent lightning, and Laura felt a force tug violently at her chest, a dizzying vertigo that made her lose sense of direction. For an endless second, she thought she might split in two. Sophia gripped her hand, the volcanic stone around Laura's neck flared bright, and an unseen current seemed to bind them together. Amid the cacophony of voices and flashes of light, everything around them dissolved into a pitch-black hush, as though they were being drawn into an endless funnel. When they opened their eyes again, they no longer stood in the studio. They found themselves in a long, narrow corridor covered with mirrors on both sides, reflecting distorted versions of themselves in infinite repetition. The floor was damp, as if coated with thick dew, and the air, heavy with the scent of mold and ash, weighed down their lungs with every breath. Laura clutched the amulet more tightly, seeking solace in the faint warmth it emitted, while Sophia scanned their surroundings, wary yet captivated, trying to determine where they had ended up in the mirror's dimension. A tense silence surrounded them, broken only by the distant echoes of footsteps that belonged to no visible form. "We're in the beyond," Sophia whispered, her voice trembling with both awe and dread. "This corridor should lead us to the heart of the realm, where the souls roam, and where the guardian hides." Without any other choice, they began to walk. At every step, a noise like metallic whispers seemed to issue from the mirrored walls. A closer look revealed fleeting images of unknown faces, each reflecting pleas for release, some with vacant looks, others twisted in fury or grief. In time, they reached a place where the corridor opened into a wide chamber, crowned by an enormous round mirror that pulsed like a living organ, emitting a faint purple glow. The vibrations from it made the air tremble, causing Sophia to gasp and place a hand over her heart. "Feel that?" she asked. Laura nodded, struggling against a nauseating sensation swirling through her. It was as if every force in that place converged on this central point. She heard multiple voices call out her name, begging for help, overshadowed by one deep, imposing voice. "Who dares profane my realm?" Fear was tangible, but Laura inhaled, recalling Elias and her vow to liberate the souls imprisoned here. With Sophia by her side, she moved forward, determined to confront an ancient threat they barely understood. Yet neither had illusions that the Guardian would be easily overcome. A single misstep could leave them lost forever in that dimension, joining the countless voices wandering in the labyrinth of reflections. Still, in that place's very heart, the voices echoing in a cacophony served not just as a testament to pain, but also as a sign that hope lingered, even in the darkest corners of existence. Surrounded by the echoing voices and restless shadows of that mirrored realm, Laura and Sophia ventured deeper into the corridors, feeling an ever heavier weight in the atmosphere. The jagged passages of this dimension seemed to warp and shift around them, as though their own anxieties and uncertainties were shaping the scenery. Every so often, the floor beneath them would flicker with a pale luminescence, revealing fleeting images of tragedies from other eras. A once grand hall now in ruins, a crying child abandoned in a dusty corner, a faceless figure trapped behind glass. Each image was as fragmented as a broken dream, forming an array of half-remembered nightmares. It was then that the mirror shard Laura carried began to vibrate gently, as if attuned to the sorrows emanating from the walls. She remembered the vague stories she had read, tales of how the mirror's curse fed on human fear, and how the only possible salvation lay in facing these memories instead of running from them. At one turn, they found an opening in the otherwise endless corridor, an eerie chamber lined with pillars that appeared to be carved from an obsidian-like stone. Faint arcs of bluish light danced between the pillars, illuminating spectral silhouettes drifting aimlessly in the air. Sophia recognized these figures as the lost memories of those who had fallen prey to the mirror's power. She opened the grimoire, searching for any spell or incantation that might offer these wandering souls some measure of peace. But the line she read spoke mostly of caution, warning that in a place where memories had solidified into illusions, those illusions might overtake one's mind if confronted carelessly. Laura, for her part, felt a strong empathy stirring within her. Every subtle flicker, every shadow cast upon the stone floor, told a story of grief and regret. She, too, carried regrets. Moments when she felt she had failed or hesitated in life, moments she would rather forget. But here, in this labyrinth of haunted recollections, forgetting was not an option. A swirl of light suddenly revealed a hazy vision: her grandmother's old house, the walls battered, and a younger Laura standing alone, tears streaking her face. For an instant, she could even taste the bitter ache of loss. Before the darkness could swallow that memory again, she heard a faint cry echo against the chamber walls, a child's sob that might well have been her own voice. Sophia sensed Laura's distress and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Summoning whatever resolve she had, Laura stepped carefully toward the flickering image, which flickered like a candle about to go out. She whispered her regrets into the air, owning the pain she had refused to face for so long. The moment she spoke the words, a faint warmth surged through her, and the vision receded, leaving a space of calm where torment had once been. Sophia recognized this reaction as more than coincidence. It hinted that by acknowledging and understanding their deepest regrets, they could weaken the hold that the mirror's illusions had over them. They pressed on, weaving through corridors that alternated between near darkness and eerie glow. Each new passage brought more broken scenes: fragments of battles, funerals, haunting dances from past centuries, and solitary figures endlessly wandering. Some were from historical events, others from tragedies less grand but equally poignant, all contained within this dimension as though stored in an immense archive of forgotten sorrow. The air itself felt charged with unspoken laments, stirring deep empathy in Laura's heart. It occurred to her that maybe, just as Elias needed rescuing, each memory deserved validation. But neither she nor Sophia had the power to set everything free on their own. All they could do was push forward, reaching for the core of the mirror's curse, hoping to undo the knot of horror that bound these souls. Eventually, the corridor opened into a circular space where the ground was scored with faint lines, spiraling out from the center. Hovering above that central point was a broken shard of the very mirror they sought to overcome, a piece humming with a dissonant energy. When Laura approached, the shard glowed and flashed images so rapidly it almost overwhelmed her. Fleeting scenes of men and women whose faces bore terror, confusion, and ultimately a hollow acceptance as they were absorbed into the reflection. The disjointed mosaic seemed to stitch itself together into a tapestry of fates lost in the mirror. Yet, beneath the anguish, Laura discerned a unifying thread: the longing to be seen, understood, and released. She carefully reached out and touched the shard, bracing herself for an onslaught of dread. Instead, a strange clarity washed over her. She sensed that these myriad souls did not only suffer, they also held fragments of knowledge, clues about how the mirror had come into existence and how it might be defeated. Gathering her courage, she let herself experience a flood of memories not her own, glimpses of ancient rituals and desperate bargains made by someone who had once coveted the mirror's twisted power. In that onrush of borrowed images, Laura understood that the mirror was not inherently evil. It had been corrupted long ago by someone's dark intent, feeding on the worst aspects of human nature ever since. Sophia watched tensely, ready to pull her friend away if the visions became too intense. But when Laura withdrew her hand, she met Sophia's eyes with newfound determination. "We have to keep going," she murmured, her voice resolute. "This mirror might have started as something neutral, even sacred. If we reach the heart of its power, maybe we can undo everything that's been done, and free the ones trapped here." Sophia nodded, closing the grimoire with care. With their path set, they left behind that chamber of lost memories, each step echoing across the corridor's ancient stone. Surrounded by the lingering moans of past lives, they felt both the weight of history and a flicker of hope, that no matter how fractured a soul might be, it was still capable of yearning for release. The mirrored dimension seemed to blur the line between the tangible and a feverish dream when Laura and Sophia finally arrived at a vast chamber where the giant mirror, a circular gateway, appeared partially fragmented, its smooth surface shimmering with eerie reflections that defied logic. The ever-present whisper of voices rose and fell in tandem with a slow pulse of purple light emanating from the fractured mirror, as if a colossal heart lay beating behind the glass. Shadows clustered at the edges of the chamber, undulating like waves in a still sea, harboring a mysterious threat. At the center, a small dais carved from obsidian appeared to support another piece of the ancient artifact. Its faint vibrations rippled through the entire space, intensifying as the two women stepped forward. Sophia consulted her grimoire nervously, interpreting symbols that resembled twisted serpents devouring each other's tails, a mark signifying the presence of what legends called the guardian of the portal. A chill shot through her, for she suspected that beyond the physical layers of this mirrored dimension, something more ancient and malignant stood watch. Indeed, the moment Laura and Sophia approached the dais, the whole chamber trembled. With a low groan, the largest shards of the fractured mirror melded together like living mercury, forming an elongated surface from which a dark silhouette emerged. Larger and more solid than any specter they had encountered, this being resembled a hooded figure, its robe made of a mosaic of shifting reflections that depicted faces distorted by agony, each twisting in silent torment. Atop its head sat a crown of dark crystal, each facet gleaming with the trapped expressions of tormented souls. Through a chorus of echoes, it announced in a deep, layered voice that resonated in their minds, "I am the guardian of the portal. For eons I have stood watch over the threshold between your dreams and your nightmares, feeding on each mortal fear." A hush fell across the chamber, as though it held its breath. The guardian raised an arm slowly, and the mirrored surfaces all around ignited with ephemeral visions, souls of countless centuries, each crying out in terror, illusions of entire civilizations lost within reflections, and shadows writhing in corners. Laura felt the volcanic stone at her neck grow warm, a subtle reassurance that she was not entirely vulnerable here. Sophia sensed the tension build as she flipped through the grimoire's pages, seeking any hint of a ritual that could weaken this intimidating entity. But the guardian simply let out a multi-tonal laugh, a horrifying sound reminiscent of glass shards scraping each other. "What belongs to me?" it intoned, mocking Laura's earlier accusation. "All who gaze too long into these reflections are, by their own fear, drawn to me, nourishing my domain. You cannot sever this bond without embracing your own shadows. Do you dare?" Laura swallowed, mustering her courage. She clutched the amulet tightly, remembering her vow. "I've come this far," she said, "and I won't let you keep these souls trapped. They don't belong to you." But her voice quivered, betraying her own uncertainty. The guardian seized upon this falter and lunged, its arm elongating like a stream of liquid glass that hurled a dark projectile at her. Instinctively, she raised her hands to shield herself, only to be hit by an impact that launched her into a pillar, the stone at her neck flaring up to cushion the blow. Dazed, Laura fought to remain conscious as Sophia lifted the grimoire, chanting words of banishment. Yet each syllable seemed to fade under the guardian's oppressive aura, the incantations losing force before they could manifest. Feeling a swell of anger mingled with compassion, Laura dug deep, recalling the scattered hints from her grandmother's tales about confronting darkness. She stood, heart pounding, yet refusing to kneel before this monstrosity. With the amulet at her chest, she envisioned every moment of resolve, every pain she had suffered, forging a shield. A flicker of brilliant orange light sparked from the stone, making the guardian recoil. Sophia, spotting her chance, summoned an incantation from the grimoire's final pages, channeling it with fervor. This time, the guardian's confident sneer wavered. Black tendrils flailed around its silhouette, revealing glimpses of the dimension's swirling walls. But a surge of renewed power erupted from the guardian, an onslaught of illusions that rushed into Laura's consciousness. She saw faceless silhouettes reaching for her, heard the screeching wails of countless souls trapped between worlds. For a split second, she wavered, uncertain whether to surrender. Then came Elias's voice in her mind, a faint echo encouraging her not to yield. Summoning that memory, she braced herself, letting her fierce compassion for the trapped souls define her will. The amulet's glow intensified, radiating outward like a protective beacon. The guardian hissed in fury as cracks formed across its crown, the shifting mosaic of tortured faces contorting into silent cries. The entire chamber vibrated, pillars trembling, while beams of pure light shot from the dais, fracturing illusions that had held the dimension in thrall. In a burst of energy, the guardian released a final roar, unleashing a shockwave that nearly overwhelmed Laura and Sophia. Yet the women stood their ground, calling on every scrap of courage. Sophia shouted the last refrain of the banishment spell, and cracks snaked across the guardian's form, unveiling ephemeral shapes that dissolved into the mirror's depths. Trembling violently, the guardian collapsed into a flurry of reflections that swirled about before vanishing into the shard center. Silence fell, and the chamber's swirling walls gradually subsided, leaving behind only the faint hum of spent magic. Laura panted, heart racing, struggling to believe the confrontation was over. Sophia knelt, tears of relief streaming down her face, the grimoire quivering in her grasp. They had challenged the guardian of the portal, a being as old as the mirror itself, and emerged alive, if only barely. In the hush that followed, the dais glowed softly, and Laura sensed a subtle shift in the dimension around them. Echoes of thanks floated through the air, whispers of souls once bound in fear. Yet somewhere in that swirling twilight, a deeper gloom lurked, suggesting that though the Guardian had been vanquished, the mirror's ancient curse had not yet been fully destroyed. With unspoken understanding, Laura and Sophia rose, exchanging resolute gazes. There was no turning back now. They would press on to the very heart of this realm, aiming to unravel the final secrets that kept the mirror and its captive souls ensnared in darkness. When the searing glow that had consumed Laura and Sophia subsided, they found themselves in a void where shape and sound seemed unbearably absent. For a moment, Laura lost all sense of self, as if her consciousness had been untethered from her physical form and flung into a limbo between dream and nightmare. Gradually, though, her senses returned. First, the feeling of what seemed like solid ground beneath her feet, even if that ground remained intangible, lacking any distinct texture. Next, a faint breeze stirred her hair, prompting her to open her eyes. She was confronted with an unbelievable landscape. Spanning as far as sight allowed were floating cliffs draped in dark-hued foliage that shimmered purple under a sky threaded with silent lightning arcs. The atmosphere exuded an odd tranquility. Yet it was a fraught calm, weighted with unspoken menace, like the hush before a cosmic storm. Nearby, Sophia lay on her knees, clutching the grimoire, clearly exhausted by the energies consumed in their ordeal with the Guardian. As soon as she gathered her strength, the medium looked up at Laura with a mixture of astonishment and alarm. Meanwhile, the amulet of volcanic rock around Laura's neck pulsed gently, as if in resonance with this strange realm rather than in defense against it. Still befuddled, Laura gently helped Sophia rise, and together they surveyed the place, seeking any clue about where they might have ended up. Everything hinted that this was not simply the inside of the mirror nor the same chamber where they'd battled the Guardian. The air, the light, even gravity itself seemed to obey rules distinctly alien to those in their own world. No roads or structures were visible, only a faintly translucent ground that at times afforded glimpses of countless wandering shapes beneath its surface. Occasionally, these shapes angled their gazes upward with expressionless eyes, conveying silent appeals for help or deliverance. Laura's heart sank, recalling why she had undertaken this perilous journey to begin with: Elias and all the other souls imprisoned by the mirror's darkness. Fired by resolve, she turned to Sophia, whose eyes darted through the grimoire, searching for any mention of a border region in the mirrored dimension. At length, she stumbled upon a fragmentary reference to a place called the Threshold of Memories, an edge realm supposedly holding stories long buried, voices in search of redemption. With this partial clue, the two pressed on, guided solely by a vague sense of direction and the intermittent impulses the amulet radiated, warming whenever they chose one path over another. The floating terrain continually shifted. Mist-clad hills emerged one moment, only to dissolve into barren plains studded with crystalline spires the next. The entire setting felt like multiple overlapping layers of reality, overlapping again as they ventured further. At times, the wind brought faint whispers of unknown tongues, voices uttering prayers or half-formed pleas lost in the infinite penumbra around them. Yet through it all, they retained focus, scanning for any sign of Elias or the myriad others languishing in limbo. After traveling for an indeterminate span, no sun or moon marked time here, they reached a natural bridge spanning a deep chasm veiled in silver fog. Each step tested their courage, as the bridge quivered and groaned like a web about to snap under the strain of some ungainly prey. Crossing it, they came upon something simultaneously foreboding and hopeful: an ancient structure resembling a ruined temple carved into the rock face of a mountainside. Columns etched with serpent-entwined symbols, ones echoing the Guardian's own sigils, stood out, but accompanying them were engravings depicting other, perhaps older, entities. The building radiated an uneasy sense of the sacred, as if it once housed grand ceremonies or timeless pacts. Yet, from within, a subtle lavender glow beckoned, as though the temple held a hidden promise. At the threshold, Laura paused, unsure whether they should barge in without a clear plan. Sophia seemed similarly apprehensive, yet she had found one last mention in the old grimoire: the revelation of the otherworld, referencing a primal force that, should it choose to aid them, might shatter the mirror's eternal chain, but only at a steep price. The text warned that only someone who had confronted the Guardian could even approach it, and Laura fit the description. She had met the Guardian face to face, though their confrontation ended abruptly and under uncertain circumstances. Pushed by both curiosity and the urgent necessity of saving trapped souls, they ventured inside, noticing the darkness giving way to corridors lit by flickering blue flames. Hooded statues lined the path, their sculpted faces seemingly tracking the women's every move. At the end of the corridor, they reached an antechamber marked by a sigil on the floor, showing a hand cradling a small mirror. More archaic inscriptions flanked this design, which Sophia hastily deciphered. "He who gazes without fear shall meet truth, and truth rends the veil between all worlds." Laura felt an instinctive chill, as though those words spoke directly to everything she had faced thus far. Without warning, a figure stepped from the shadows in the far corner. Draped in tattered yellowish shrouds, it possessed long, tangled hair and a gaunt face etched with sorrow. Before Laura or Sophia could react, the figure lifted a trembling arm to reveal a miniature mirror, reminiscent of a locket, its glass surface clouded. Wordlessly, the woman's anguished yet hopeful eyes flicked between them, as if she had awaited their arrival for countless ages. Slowly, she raised the tiny mirror and exhaled across it, releasing a silvery dust that engulfed the room. Within that dust, fleeting visions emerged, a swirling display of a ritual involving dozens of figures in archaic attire, chanting to confine some monstrous form within an immense, ancient mirror. The same mirror that centuries later would find its way to Laura. By the end of this swirling spectacle, the woman sighed wearily and dropped the miniature mirror, which shattered into glistening fragments. Then, with a slight bow, she surrendered, as though entrusting her final hopes to Laura, who realized they were likely on the cusp of comprehending the mirror's entire tragic legacy. Sophia concluded these new revelations proved they had stumbled upon the revelation of the other world. Pressing forward seemed inevitable, though the consequences loomed large. A deeper confrontation with an elder power that surpassed the Guardian, risking not only their physical forms but their very souls. Yet at that moment, spurred by the pleas of Elias and the countless voices wandering the mirror's corridors, they resolved in solemn silence to press on, guided by the temple's faint luminescence, hearts bracing for whatever awaited beyond. The door they had just discovered, hidden deep within the ruined temple, opened up before Laura and Sophia like a gaping maw eager to devour any bravery they could muster. Armed with a grimoire in one hand and her other hand resting on Sophia's shoulder, Laura stepped into the darkness, feeling her lungs constrict in the thick, humid atmosphere that smelled faintly of fungal growth from another world. The tattered woman in yellowish rags, stationed near the entrance with eyes hollowed by despair and hope, silently observed them, as though fulfilling one final duty before fading away altogether. Once the two women crossed the threshold, the door sealed shut behind them with a hollow clank, cutting off any vestige of light from the corridor and plunging them into a claustrophobic darkness. It was only then, gazing upward, that they noticed a faint greenish glow emanating from ancient markings on the floor and walls. These runes seemed to shift beneath their gaze, assembling themselves into elaborate geometric shapes that formed what the grimoire described as the Labyrinth of Illusions, an intermediate realm in which travelers faced both their own darkest fears and their most fervent longings, where the line between truth and trickery all but vanished. Laura shuddered with the first step. The labyrinth responded instantly, projecting onto the floor and walls a rapid sequence of images that drew on twisted moments from her past, though with subtle distortions. She saw herself as a child, grieving her grandmother's passing, but this time, in a desolate funeral as if no other relative existed. Another sequence showed her first job as a restorer, overshadowed by co-workers whose voices morphed into mocking laughter. For her part, Sophia tried to illuminate their surroundings with the faint glow of an enchanted candle, only for reflections to spring up in the corridor, revealing her own past as a medium who had turned her back on family traditions, an outcome stained by guilt and isolation. Each image wore a colorless tint that amplified the sense of alienation. Every footstep brought them closer to a new revelation, as though the labyrinth cannibalized the shadows of their histories to weave an almost inescapable snare. Pressing forward, they noticed each fork in the path transforming before their eyes. Sometimes, a corridor opened wide, lit by floating orbs of uncertain origin. Other times, that same corridor vanished into darkness, becoming a claustrophobic dead end. Mirrors sprang from the walls, displaying not their reflections but warped incarnations that wore expressions of profound terror, as if warning them of looming danger. Laura clutched the volcanic amulet against her chest, repeatedly reminding herself that genuine strength came from acknowledging even the harshest truth within. At one point, a reflection in the mirror confronted her with a horrifying version of herself, hollow-eyed and wearing a maniacal grin, as though she had already succumbed to the realm's powers. Her stomach churned, but she focused on Sophia's determined gaze for solace. Continuing through the labyrinth grew increasingly surreal when voices in the walls started disclosing secrets neither had ever uttered out loud, painting inner turmoil neither believed they could handle. Rounding one narrow bend, they discovered a door that, once opened, revealed what looked like Laura's own studio. But everything was upside down, including a trunk and the cursed mirror, surrounded by inverted candles dripping black wax onto the ceiling. Painted on the floor, now the ceiling in this warped vision, were occult symbols that pulsed like tiny black hearts. Nearby lay an open chest containing photographs of unknown people, each subject frantically crossing out their own faces. Among them flickered the image of Elias, mouth wide in a silent scream. This fleeting glimpse of him reignited Laura's sense of purpose. Though shaken, she recalled her vow and felt her determination resurge, fueled by the memory of countless other souls begging for release. Sophia, gripping the grimoire, feverishly searched for any section offering insight on navigating the labyrinth of illusions unscathed. She found a marginal note from some ancient scribe, warning that a traveler must cling to a personal anchor, someone or something representing the traveler's truest essence. Laura instantly thought of the nights she spent as a child, her grandmother telling her tales about courage and unconditional love. That memory stayed pure, unaffected by fear or cynicism. Holding Sophia's hand, she proposed that they both fix their minds on a cherished memory. For Laura, it was her grandmother's lullabies. For Sophia, the moment she saved a young child through a cleansing ritual many years ago. Guided by these anchors of authenticity, they felt the labyrinth ease up slightly. Shadows grew less frenzied, and illusions lost some of their menacing edge. Realizing they had found a brief advantage, Laura and Sophia pushed on, coming to a broad gallery supported by ebony columns, each column topped with mosaic glass depicting battles between humans and shadow creatures, all mirrored in water or polished metal. At the center stood a pedestal holding a shard of the same cursed mirror they had encountered before, a piece chipped and scarred. Approaching cautiously, Laura felt a jolt of recognition. Though the fragment lay inert, it emanated an unsettling energy that stirred her own memories, as if the shard wanted her to recall the origins of the curse. Touching it made her mind spin in a vortex of glimpses, times and places where entire civilizations faltered before the mirror, sacrifices performed in the name of misguided devotion, and a tapestry of ancient sigils that sealed away something monstrous. Sensing she could glean vital clues from the swirl of images, Laura steeled herself to memorize each symbol, each cryptic name. Abruptly, she withdrew her hand. The shard trembled as if alive, but soon went still, reverting to mere inert glass as she regained her balance. As she caught her breath, it struck Laura that the labyrinth of illusions was not merely a place for torment or deception. It was also a test, each corridor representing reflections of the traveler's innermost fears and regrets. Now that they had confronted fragments of those fears, she and Sophia felt emboldened. Yet they knew their trial was far from complete. The Guardian was one face of a greater evil, and the true core of the mirror's power remained out of sight. With a silent exchange of glances, they resolved to continue. With each onward step, the twisting walls and the echo of lost voices receded behind them, giving way to new corridors. They had no illusions about being out of danger, but they now traveled beneath a halo of courage derived from the knowledge that genuine love and truth could outshine even the darkest illusions. And so they pressed on, guided by an unwavering inner flame, each step echoing with the faint cries of souls who had perished after failing to conquer their own reflections. The corridors of the labyrinth of illusions twisted endlessly, leading Laura and Sophia into a state of perpetual alertness. Each turn seemed to spawn new traps and conjured images drawn from the darkest corners of their minds. The air grew heavy, weighing on their lungs, and the sense of invisible eyes watching them at every step made it even harder to breathe. Laura held the volcanic amulet firmly against her chest, feeling its gentle pulsing, while Sophia revisited pages in the grimoire in search of a reliable exit from that shape-shifting environment. Yet they did not expect the labyrinth to reveal a new face, an extensive crossing with numerous parallel corridors, each adorned by an identical door carved with the mirror's familiar patterns. Approaching for a closer look, they realized each door might deliver them into a slightly different version of reality. Multiple possible outcomes intersecting there, unfolding in an impossible weave of space-time. Without knowing which path to choose, both women felt apprehension spike, as the risk of splitting up or becoming trapped in separate dimensions suddenly became tangible. That was when Laura heard a familiar, tremulous whisper echoing through the corridors. "Laura," the voice rang muffled, yet the tremor in it reverberated with a desperate intensity. Even though it sounded far away, She knew it came from Elias, the man she was determined to save. Tossing caution aside, she ran in the direction she thought the sound came from, while Sophia followed, urging her friend to stay focused and not be swayed by the labyrinth's illusions. But the hope of finding Elias propelled Laura forward at a brisk pace. She dodged shadows taking shape around them like tentacles of darkness, grabbing or persuading them to turn back. Finally, she reached a bend where Elias's voice seemed the clearest, only to find yet another tall mirror on the wall. The reflection showed her own exhausted silhouette and, behind her, a clouded image of the young man, as though he were on the other side, helpless. Each time she tried to reach through, the figure appeared to retreat, dissolving into uncertainty. Even as frustration swelled within, it reignited her vow never to abandon Elias. Concerned about potentially being misled, Laura searched for a hallway that might lead to a real encounter. Sophia joined her, having caught up with the open grimoire. She guided Laura's attention to a page describing something called The Paths of the Double World, which warned that every adventurer exploring the depths of the mirror would eventually discover these junctions, each corridor potentially leading to alternative versions of the traveler's own past or future, and only one path was true. To discern which route held truth, one would have to make a painful choice, sacrificing a piece of one's own dread to glimpse the real path ahead. Confused, Laura asked how she was supposed to offer such a sacrifice, and Sophia explained, voice trembling, that the text was maddeningly vague, mentioning only that the traveler must speak aloud the darkest horror in their heart, a self-exposure that could break a person if they were not truly ready. Yet Laura knew that if they failed, Elias would remain lost forever alongside other imprisoned souls. Summoning the nerve, she began to confess her deepest fears. The dread of failing, the guilt of not showing her grandmother enough gratitude, the haunting belief that she could have prevented tragedies had she been stronger or wiser. Each admission made the labyrinth tremble, as though feeding on the insecurities that had once sustained it. Yet with each word, Laura felt lighter, as if an ancient wound were finally draining. When she finished, trembling and emotionally spent, one of the corridor doors ahead glowed brighter than all the others. Sophia recognized this as their cue. Supporting Laura, they moved toward that luminous door. Strange mechanical sounds throbbed behind it, hinting at something vast in motion. Tentatively touching the cold wood, Laura felt a jolt in her chest, and the portal slid open, revealing a grand chamber tinted in violet. Crossing the threshold, they found themselves outside the labyrinth. The winding halls lay behind them, replaced by an open space encircled by basalt columns. A metallic scent, reminiscent of stale blood, drifted in the silence. At the center of the room, perched on a platform, was yet another mirror fragment. But this one gleamed ominously, radiating pulses that rattled the floor, echoing the throbbing of a heart near bursting. Sophia's knees nearly buckled under the pressure of the aura, recognizing the grim possibility recorded in the grimoire. Should all mirror fragments ever unite, the rift between the upper world, the real one, and the lower world, the mirror dimension, could dissolve entirely, releasing both imprisoned souls and potentially unspeakable horrors. Steeling her resolve, Laura approached the fragment, feeling her pulse thrash in her throat. Carefully placing her hand on it, she was blinded by a flash of intense light. An onrush of visions revealed contrasting futures. In one, she abandoned her quest, leaving the mirror forever broken, ensuring the real world remained safe at the cost of dooming Elias and countless other souls to oblivion. In another, she repaired the mirror, opening a doorway that could rescue everyone but exposed humanity to evils that dwarfed the Guardian. Lastly, a third vision flickered. It showed her living a mundane existence back in her studio, gazing at an innocuous mirror, haunted by a profound emptiness. Sophia jolted her awake from this trance, shaking her shoulder. At that moment, Laura realized the mirror was testing her. One path offered security but condemned others. The other promised salvation but might unleash ruin on an unimaginable scale. She stared at her friend, who in turn recognized the weight of the moment yet radiated unwavering support. Summoning everything in her, Laura pressed the fragment to the glowing volcanic amulet around her neck, which crackled with orange sparks that raced across the chamber walls like serpentine lightning. The entire hall quaked, and a groan resounded from the depths below, as though something massive stirred in a hidden chasm. When an otherworldly doorway appeared at the chamber's far end, dyed in an eerie purple hue, Laura and Sophia heard something akin to a morose melody on the other side. They understood this led to the final confrontation, not just with the Guardian but with a power preceding him, the same entity that once doomed the mirror to feed on fear. Despite no guarantee they would ever return, Both women marched forward, the mirror fragment clutched at Laura's side, the grimoire clasped in Sophia's arms. In that instant, all their sacrifices thus far coalesced into one fateful determination. They would take on an evil older than centuries, risking everything for the lives trapped in its thrall. Beneath the vaulted ceiling of the chamber, with the reassembled fragment blazing in Laura's hands, they stepped over the threshold, chasing a future that might grant a collective deliverance, or bury them all in unimaginable darkness. A subdued glow enveloped the room beyond the door, which no longer pulsed with the heaviness that once plagued every step within the labyrinth. Yet Laura and Sophia could not shake the feeling that something momentous lay in wait. Pale and delicate beams of light carved out a sanctuary once cloaked in thick gloom. The marble floor was stained and riddled with archaic inscriptions that coiled and flickered, forming chaotic spirals. Overhead, the ceiling vanished into murk, as if it extended infinitely. Each step Laura took echoed, resonating through what appeared to be a temple or shrine long stripped of splendor, replaced by an oppressive hush that concealed a presence eerily akin to the mirror's old influence. At the center of the space loomed an altar half-circled in design, chiseled from a stone suspiciously reminiscent of the volcanic rock that shaped her amulet. Veins of purple light shimmered in the cracks of the altar, producing a faint glow. On it rested another segment of the ancient mirror, this time riven by a diagonal crack that revealed something pulsing behind the glass, resembling living tissue. Each beat sent creeping shadows up the altar's walls, twisting into half-human silhouettes before dissolving. Clutching her amulet reflexively, Laura sensed the artifact respond with a soft hum, confirming that, indeed, this was the nexus of something old and ominous, the origin point of all that had been corrupted. Just then, Sophia directed Laura's attention to a niche in the opposite wall. A faded painting depicted a female figure in ancient garb, eyes bound by a strip of cloth, hands gripping a mirror. Beneath the figure ran an inscription in archaic Latin, which Sophia partially deciphered. "Shadows of the past guard the path. Only one who dares confront the truth shall free what was lost." A wave of dread and yet a flicker of recognition swept over Laura. Though they had surmounted many trials, she knew something critical remained undone. She recalled Elias, the ragged woman in saffron rags, and others that had flickered through her visions. Each person or presence encountered in the mirrored dimension felt like a puzzle piece, united in telling a grander story whose origins spanned eons. Abruptly, an abrupt gust swept the chamber, rattling the altar's pedestal. Within the mirror fragment, a violent glow flared, unveiling scattered visions. Laura's childhood home, college corridors, fleeting nightmares she'd endured through adolescence. These images coalesced into a roiling swirl, forming a single command. Then, an indistinct figure materialized overhead. A spirit, or perhaps only a vestige of something once fully human. Laura recognized Elias's face, now strangely solid, though faintly wavering like a candle. He stretched out a hand, voice trembling. "You have come too far to falter now. This place is where it all began, and where it may all end." Though dazed by Elias's physical presence in this semi-real form, Laura mustered her composure, stepping forward. She wanted to ask so many things. About his past, the old corruption that had ensnared him, and why the mirror had zeroed in on her. Yet words evaded her as a thunderous growl interrupted, emanating from within the fissures in the chamber's volcanic stone. Sophia rushed to consult the grimoire, trying to locate a protective rite. Suddenly, the swirling darkness overhead spiraled downward. The guardian re-emerged, no longer the proud figure encountered earlier, but rather a fused entity of roiling shadows, sprouting hideous, jelly-like tendrils. Its eyes remained blank, glimmering with 1,000 unsaved souls. Elias recoiled, his body flickering out of focus, leaving Laura and Sophia to confront the creature. Without hesitation, Sophia flung the grimoire open, chanting a protective formula. Yet with each repeated verse, a formless wave rippled through the guardian, nullifying her words. The floor cracked under its might, red-hot beams radiating from beneath. Laura steeled herself, recalling the advice from her grandmother's stories about harnessing internal truth to repel the unknown. Strengthening her grip on the amulet, she advanced, voice low but resolute, warning the guardian she would not cower nor stand by while innocent souls remained fettered in nightmares. Shadows whipped around, fueling the creature's wrath. A black tendril slashed at Laura. She was saved from a direct hit by a quick sidestep. Wincing from exertion, she realized raw might alone would not suffice. In that instant, She remembered how her fear fed the mirror's illusions and realized it was fear, more than anything, that empowered the Guardian. Tapping into her compassion for Elias and every voice she had heard, she spoke, "You thrive on our weaknesses, but they are not who we are. I accept my fears, but I will not be defined by them." The reflection of that resolve rippled across the chamber, making the Guardian hesitate. Seizing the moment, Sophia declaimed the final lines of an exorcism from the grimoire's penultimate page. Meanwhile, Elias, still half-astral, raised his hands, projecting a feeble yet vital energy wave to hinder the Guardian's next assault. The creature roared, tentacles fracturing into swirling black shards that scattered across the chamber. Laura braced for a climactic standoff. Ignoring the agony of previous hits, she glared into the Guardian's featureless eyes, voice echoing with unexpected confidence. "I haven't come this far to fail now. Even if it costs me everything, I won't allow you or any other being to keep these souls trapped." The amulet erupted with a radiant beam that directly connected to the fragment on the altar. The other fragments in Laura's satchel flared, uniting in a chain of vibrant light that spiraled to the dais. The entire chamber shook with a deafening rumble, and black cracks manifested along the Guardian's limbs. It screeched, contorting like a flame snuffed out by wind, then seemed to implode in on itself, evaporating into the gloom. As the echoes subsided, Laura realized just how drained she was, every muscle trembling. Sophia, breathless and on her knees, still held the grimoire. Elias, panting, stared at the dais, aware this victory marked only a step in the confrontation. Even though the Guardian had been subdued yet again, they all felt a deeper stain in the core of that mirror, a malevolent root that, unless cut for good, would re-emerge. Heart-pounding, Laura braced for the next step. The newly bonded shards of the ancient mirror glowed with an oddly tranquil aura, as if awaiting one final stroke of destiny. In the hush, she sensed a gentle presence, perhaps of the mirror itself, whispering an invitation to reveal the last layer of truth. Shadows of the past had guided her here, paving the way for a final decision, a fork in which redemption or ultimate demise loomed over every living soul. Crossing the radiant portal that appeared when the reassembled mirror fragments unleashed their shared power, Laura felt a sudden weight press on her shoulders. It felt like a violent, invisible wind demanding every drop of energy she had left. Sophia, who still clung to the grimoire like a life preserver, followed closely behind, while Elias, trembling between existence and spirit, watched them with determination etched into his spectral features. As they stepped past the threshold, the environment arranged itself like a twisted fusion of Laura's own studio back in the real world and the gloom-laden corridors they'd wandered through in the mirrored dimension. Shards of glass littered the ground, each reflecting blurred, swirling memories. Small windows into Laura's ordinary life intermixed with snippets of harrowing episodes from across history. Immediately, a hush veiled them, broken only by an undertone of many voices rising in unison, as if pleading for salvation or justice. Laura realized every step she took magnified this discordant hymn of laments, threatening to break her concentration and drag her into panic. Steeling herself, she walked on, each step crunching bits of glass that rippled with fleeting visions. A swirl of illusions darted up along the walls, showing episodes ranging from Laura's mundane personal struggles to monumental tragedies she had never witnessed but which seemed imprinted in her subconscious, possibly vestiges of other times and places touched by the mirror's curse. A door materialized ahead, seemingly a plain wooden door from a standard home interior. Elias gestured that they should proceed, convinced that beyond it lay the culmination of their trials, a confrontation that might free every soul or doom them further. Sophia nodded, flipping through the grimoire, searching for any fragment of text referencing the place of the final confrontation. All she found were cryptic mentions of a reflected heart, an entity or location that might tie the mirror's realm to reality. At last, they opened the door and found a room reminiscent of Laura's grandmother's old house, with furniture covered by white sheets, the wallpaper peeling in places, windows dusty enough to filter only a feeble, sickly light. It was a memory tinged with the gloom of neglect, tainted by shadows. Footsteps approached from the corridor, followed by a voice that made the walls and floor quake. The Guardian, once thought dispelled, manifested again, but in a more mutable, swirling shape. This time, it seemed less concerned with illusions or pretense, instead advancing with a monstrous aura of dread, devouring the corners of the room. Elias attempted to intercept it, but his spectral form flickered helplessly. Sophia tried to raise a protective chant, but every incantation fizzled in midair, as if the guardian had transcended vulnerability to such spells. In that moment, Laura realized no incantation or external power would stop the guardian. It represented the darkest aspect of the mirror, indeed, of herself. With a jolt, she recalled how her grandmother would tell her that real battle with fear always began inside us. And so, in the once familiar room transfigured by gloom, Laura prepared to confront the side of her soul that had unwittingly nourished the guardian's evil. Clinging fiercely to everything she had come to learn on this journey, her regrets, her compassion, her desire to save souls, she faced the creature. "You feed on my insecurities," she whispered, "but I won't flee you any longer. I accept that fear is part of me, but I refuse to let it rule me." A resonant wave sparked from deep within her, not from the amulet, but from her own heart. The guardian screeched, lunging forward. The walls and ceiling appeared to close in, riven by fractures that oozed black ichor. The sheer dread projected by the creature could have shattered her mind. But Laura stood firm, recalling the precious memory of Elias and countless others awaiting liberation, as well as the vital lesson her grandmother had ingrained. No enemy is more terrifying than one's own refusal to face the truth within. At contact, the guardian slammed into an invisible barrier emanating from her core, hurling it backward as it howled in frustration. Sophia, recognizing her friend's stance, resumed searching the grimoire for a final banishment. This time, each word she chanted glowed in a brilliant aura, merging with Laura's inner illumination. Piece by piece, the guardian's form cracked, revealing a deep, seething darkness at its center, the last vestige of a soul that once had let its fear corrode everything else. With no audible roar, it collapsed in on itself, a swirl of bitter ash that drifted and disappeared like smoke. Immediately, the walls grew translucent, releasing a crescendo of soft, grateful voices, no longer shrieking but singing gently. Elias faded further, more intangible with each breath, wearing a faint, bittersweet smile. Gently touching Laura's face, he whispered, "You set me free." She wanted to beg him to stay, but understood, his form belonged to this dimension, and to find peace, he must leave it behind. Giving her one final look of thanks, he dissolved, along with the wraith-like silhouettes of so many others. When the last echo died out, the cursed reflection started to fade. The old living room peeled away, revealing columns of obsidian cracked with lines of purifying light. The reassembled mirror lay on the floor, like a silent observer of all that had transpired. Laura, tears in her eyes, sensed that a heavy burden had lifted. No more voices screamed in pain. No foreboding aura threatened her sanity. Sophia dropped to her knees, the grimoire slipping from her hands. The hush that followed them was dense, but not ominous. Rather, it was suffused with calm. Laura wrapped her arms around Sophia, both women exhausted yet keenly aware that, in that small, ephemeral corner of the mirror realm, they had earned a triumph that transcended illusions. They had faced the deepest fears, not by eradicating them, but by recognizing they need not be enslaved by them. A gentle golden light bathed the sanctuary, signaling that the darkest tension had dissipated. Laura and Sophia stood in a silent sort of victory, gazing upon the now intact mirror, which reflected nothing but the calm emptiness of the chamber. The old ritual circle and the columns scarred by age no longer emanated the oppressive darkness that had dominated this place. As Laura carefully circled around the artifact, she felt a blend of awe and relief. Though the mirror still possessed a mysterious presence, it no longer teemed with lurking malevolence. No more wails of lost souls emanated from it. From the corner of her eye, she spotted Sophia flipping through the battered grimoire, desperation replaced by a thoughtful curiosity about what to do next. Their primary question remained whether the mirror should be destroyed outright, sealing away all possibility of a renewed curse, or if, through some form of purification, it might be transformed into an object of knowledge and insight. The text offered no definitive guidance. Some passages referred to exorcisms that eternally sealed the power of cursed artifacts, while others suggested that once freed of malice, such items could become bridges to a higher understanding. Sensing that the answer might lie in the artifact's origins, Laura lightly brushed a set of strange symbols on the mirror's frame. Immediately, the reflective surface clouded over, revealing fleeting images, remnants of antiquity. A dark forest, a solemn ritual conducted by robed figures, and ancient runes hammered into the mirror's metal lining. She witnessed someone remove a hood, their eyes burning with ambition, turning the once sacred object into a malevolent conduit. She experienced, in fragmented sequence, how that thirst for power had cast the earliest seeds of corruption. Horror, sorrow, and surprisingly, hope wove through her senses, as though the artifact's memory still yearned for redemption. Staggering back, Laura described these visions to Sophia, who listened gravely before revealing a conviction that the mirror, if properly cleansed, might at last return to the neutral or sacred state it once knew. The only catch was that no such right existed in any known manual. Rather, the text insisted that each cursed artifact demanded an individualized act of courage and compassion to free it of its evil. And so, beneath the ancient columns that once teemed with howling shadows, Laura gathered her strength, determined to attempt a final purification. Sophia hastily inscribed the floor with signs of renewal and healing, referencing exorcisms but adding her own invocations for rebirth. When all was ready, Laura stood before the mirror, eyes locked onto her own faint reflection. No illusions shimmered, yet it was impossible not to recall all the terror and revelations she had just experienced. Nonetheless, a calm certainty rose within her. Fear would always be part of her, but it could be met with understanding rather than flight. Placing both hands on the mirror's surface, Laura inhaled deeply and released her breath in a soft chant. She gave voice to every lesson she had learned, from the moment she first saw the mirror's strange glimmer in the auction house. Sophia read softly from the grimoire, calling upon the artifact's original essence, imploring the most ancient aspect of the mirror to awaken and accept release from the horror that had plagued it. One by one, the runes traced on the floor ignited in a soft white glow that snaked its way to the frame. Light wriggled along the engravings, creeping to the center of the surface, which turned milky white. Laura felt a mild suction pulling at her palms, but she resisted, maintaining her posture and focusing on love. Her grandmother's love, Elias's gratitude, the empathy she felt towards so many other souls trapped by the mirror. Phantom tendrils of shadow strained beneath the glass, writhing in a futile battle against the purifying surge. Unable to stand against the brilliance, they retreated, evaporating in a final hiss. Piece by piece, the mirror's dark spots vanished, revealing an even sheen of silver gray. When it was over, the surface looked almost serene. Sophia ended her chant, letting silence fill the chamber. For an uncertain moment, neither woman moved, as if stunned by the sudden lack of resistance. Then Laura stepped back, tears welling. The mirror reflected her image with uncanny clarity, revealing not just the young restorer she recognized, but a steadier soul behind the eyes, a dimension of truth she never knew she had. Drawing a breath of relief, she turned to Sophia, who was smiling through her own tears. They understood that the artifact now bore no trace of malevolence. Its potential remained, but the corruption was gone. Surrounded by crumbling stone and washed by a gentle radiance, they closed the grimoire. The air around them was peaceful, no more howling gusts or insidious murmurings. The two women exchanged a look charged with gratitude, uncertain of what to do next. Could they bring the mirror back to the real world? Should they bury it, ensuring no new caretaker would try to harness it for personal gain? Whatever their decision, one realization was clear. By conquering personal terrors, they had found a path to free countless souls and reveal a deeper truth behind the artifact. And as Laura cupped the volcanic amulet, still warm from the night's events, she felt a stirring hope that even the darkest relic could yield to the courage of a heart that dares to shine light on the shadows. The final battle. Even as a tranquil hush settled around them, Laura and Sophia remained keenly aware that some flicker of danger still hovered within the mirrored dimension. While the clarified brilliance of the newly purified mirror cast soft beams across the cracked columns and the worn stone floor, a lingering sense of foreboding filled the air, as though a final confrontation was yet to take place. Frantically flipping through the grimoire's back pages, Sophia found a cautionary note explaining that evil seldom vanishes with the first victory. Often it retreats to regroup in the shadows, waiting for an opportunity to strike anew. Determined to be sure no vestige of the Guardian or other malignant forces survived, both decided to search every niche of that interdimensional realm, brandishing the mirror like a torch of renewal while muttering the protective prayers outlined in the ancient text. They traversed spaces once devoured by oppressive darkness, now reduced to a mild gloom. Nevertheless, an undercurrent of tension accompanied them like a cold draft, the feeling of intangible eyes observing their every movement. Eventually, an open atrium unveiled itself, merging real-world architectural elements with fantastical designs. A bizarre mosaic of Greco-inspired walls, volcanic stone pillars reminiscent of Mesoamerican ruins, and Gothic stained glass windows reflecting the still flickering glow of a dimension in recovery. At its center rose the final vestige of the Guardian, a twisted mass of gloom emerging from fissures in the floor. Though battered by the cleansing rituals, it morphed into a shape bristling with countless spectral claws, each writhing with a silent desperation. A half-formed face bobbed from the center, fixing a hollow stare upon the two women, letting out a rasping sound somewhere between a whimper and a curse. Immediately, the walls darkened, as if the entity were attempting to reabsorb any remaining pockets of negativity. Sophia cried out and attempted to read from the grimoire, but the words jumbled in her mind. She saw that banishing this last shred of the Guardian would require more than incantations. It demanded unshakable will to finally annihilate the mirror's darkest residue. Summoning an outraged determination, Laura lifted the purified mirror, leveling it at the shifting mass. At once, the pristine surface radiated a cool silver glow that collided with the roiling black figure. A shriek of glass on glass screeched through the air, nearly unbearable to the human ear. Though visibly wounded by the light, the spectral creature refused to retreat, thrusting out its claws like ethereal tentacles aiming to tear open cracks in the surrounding space. Sophia, finding her voice, resumed incantations from the grimoire. Her words sent sporadic flashes of light outward, raising temporary barriers that held off the writhing claws, yet the creature persisted, spurred by a furious hunger. Realizing raw magic wouldn't be enough, Laura summoned every ounce of courage forged during her trials. In one bold move, she planted her feet and allowed everything the journey had taught her. Her empathy for the souls trapped, her hatred of oppression, her acceptance of her own fears, to merge into a burning conviction. As her eyes gleamed with an intense light, the mirror's brilliance grew until it flooded the entire space in pure silver-white radiance, freezing the creature in mid-air. Its claws halted, shriveling to ash as if consumed by holy flame. With an anguished roar that rang with centuries of hatred, the dark shape quavered before imploding, disintegrating into a flurry of soot-like particles that scattered on a current of cleansing energy. The tension that had warped the atrium lifted, replaced by a silence so intense that every corner of the dimension seemed to hold its breath. Laura, momentarily doubting her own senses, glimpsed a fleeting figure of Elias in the receding gloom, wearing a faint smile of satisfaction before disappearing altogether. Sophia exhaled, also overwhelmed, the grimoire slipping from her grip. Light began to return to the walls, stabilizing the once heaving architecture. They had eradicated the last vestige of the Guardian, removing any chance of a resurgence that might twist this realm back into a prison for fear. Slowly, the dimension's once fluid boundaries gained solidity, as if finally freed from a nightmarish dream. Exhausted yet elated, Laura and Sophia knelt, chests heaving. The mirror in Laura's arms emanated a silent calm, reflecting only the triumphant figures of the two women with a soft aura. It was then that the dimension began to subtly change, unveiling a calm twilight that rolled through the endless corridors. They sensed that the world within had been cleansed, open to an existence of gentle afterlight. But they knew they could not stay. Humans did not belong here. Recalling the final instructions in the grimoire, they read how a traveler must harbor a true desire to return, anchored by the wish to protect others, to cross the dimensional threshold without fracturing the boundary. Holding the mirror aloft, the two friends stood in the atrium's center, forming a circle of energies woven of light and protective symbols. Laura whispered the final lines of the ritual as Sophia strewed a final pinch of salt mixed with ash in the air, etching runes of crossing. A warm breeze wafted through, and the once cracked floor radiated a greenish glow. A growing radiance, like the dawning of a new sun, bloomed in the air, and suddenly an arc of luminosity shimmered. Within it, they glimpsed Laura's real-world studio, furniture and walls swaying in a warping of space. Closing their eyes, hearts drumming, they stepped through, awash in flickers of wind and the aura of crossing. In a flash, they landed on the creaky wooden floor of Laura's studio, where the mirror now stood propped by the wall, silently radiant yet utterly tranquil. Outside, no eerie murmurs nor flickering lights greeted them, only the familiar hush of dawn creeping in. Relief coursed through them as they surveyed the studio, returning to the mundane reality that felt so precious now. The air was fresh, like a home awakened from a suffocating nightmare. Exchanging a tearful smile, they emerged from the studio, leaving behind the memory of a shadowed reflection for a future glowing with a courage born from facing humanity's darkest nightmares. When dawn's gentle warmth spilled through the studio's windows the next morning, Laura rose from a deep sleep, limbs heavy with a rare mix of exhaustion and renewed vigor. After their triumphant return to reality, she and Sophia had lingered in silence for many minutes, simply observing the purified mirror leaning against the wall, half afraid that a single blink would restore the horrors they had just vanquished. Yet as sunlight blossomed, each golden beam that entered the room revealed no more warped shadows or haunting whispers. The studio, once haunted by abnormal events, glowed with a serene morning stillness, as though a thick veil of dust had been swept aside, letting the colors and gentle sounds of the ordinary world reassert themselves. Sophia, already awake for some time, was leafing through the grimoire, her expression pensive, like someone trying to figure out how to proceed after solving a daunting puzzle. While she confirmed that the Guardian was defeated and the mirror freed from its binding curse, the text offered no direct instructions on the artifact's fate from here on out. Should it be smashed, buried, or, strangely enough, allowed to remain intact under careful guardianship? Weary but smiling faintly, Sophia explained these uncertainties upon Laura's approach. Laura, too, perceived that, even though the mirror was no longer shackled by a sinister presence, it still radiated a distinct energy, yet peaceful now, like an echo of the lessons learned across all their experiences. Cautiously, she brushed her hand along the gilded frame, detecting no trace of malevolence. Instead, she felt the merest throb of vitality, as though the souls who had long occupied it had left behind faint traces of gratitude, an aura of quiet relief. Again she faced her own reflection, realizing in that moment she was changed. The Laura in the mirror wasn't the same young restorer who had hesitantly purchased a mysterious relic. She saw determination, tenacity, and a willingness to confront the unfathomable. Following a hastily prepared breakfast, the two decided they ought to store the mirror in a safe, quiet place, neither in a foreboding basement nor a forgotten attic, but somewhere flooded with natural light and calm, in case the mirror still harbored any dormant possibilities. They recalled a small country house that once belonged to Laura's grandmother, a site where she had spent many a peaceful summer, learning to appreciate the quiet wonder of old objects. Although a bit abandoned these days, the property remained a beacon of tranquility. It seemed the perfect spot to set down an artifact that had, for so long, been used for darkness, yet was now imbued with the potential to enlighten. It took them little time to pack. They draped the mirror in white linens, once used for covering old furniture, now symbolic of the object's restored innocence, and loaded it into Sophia's car. The drive to the country passed in a surprisingly buoyant atmosphere, a stark contrast to the tense final hours in the mirror realm. Laura seldom spoke, her mind roaming over how she had grown and the truths she had discovered. Sophia, for her part, debated internally how to explain her experiences to fellow mediums or paranormal researchers, unsure if they would even believe the scope of what had transpired. After hours on the road, they arrived at a modest piece of land strewn with fallen leaves and dust. Despite mild disarray, the house exuded nostalgia, a hint of the serenity Laura remembered from childhood. With reverent care, they carried the mirror into a broad central room, propping it gently against the main wall, away from direct sunlight, but still kissed by the day's gentle glow streaming through windows that were clouded with a patina of memories. Over the subsequent days, they tidied up the property, spruced up a neglected garden, and spent the evenings around a makeshift fireplace, discussing how drastically life had changed. Occasionally, the wind rattled the windows or insects collided with the house's lanterns, quiet reminders that in years past, such minor noises had terrified them. Now, any unexpected sound was met with the serenity of those who understood that most nightmares arose from within. The volcanic amulet Laura wore ceased to heat beyond her normal body temperature, as though it had concluded its purpose as a beacon in the darkness. The grimoire, stowed away in a locked cabinet, was also deemed too dangerous to reveal openly. Both women recognized that archaic knowledge could devastate unwary hands. One late afternoon, golden-hued by a setting sun, Laura approached the mirror again. Though purified, it still gave off subtle suggestions of other worlds, as though its surface might just faintly reflect possibilities in parallel dimensions. Sophia, sensing the gravity of the moment, joined her and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, acknowledging with a gentle nod that any decision about the mirror's future would be Laura's alone. She, whom the artifact had chosen at the start. Taking a deep breath, Laura recalled Elias, the ominous voices that once shrieked in the house, the monstrous illusions conjured by the Guardian, and above all, the victory brought by facing fears. Aloud, she stated her choice. The mirror was not to be destroyed. Instead, She would observe it cautiously, studying its deeper significance and warning others about the peril of messing with portals leading beyond ordinary understanding. Her declaration seemed to animate the mirror for a moment, its surface catching the sunset's ruddy glow. For an instant, Laura sensed a gentle peace, as though in letting go of fear and anger, she made space for empathy. It was the empathy she had witnessed in each rescued soul, in every confrontation with the Guardian. A soft breeze stirred the leafy trees, bringing in the scent of earth, the chatter of nighttime birds returning to their nests. Gazing at the swirling dust particles in a beam of moonlight, Laura came to terms with the fact that this rebirth in the real world encompassed not only the mirror's fate but her own as well. No longer a timid seeker but someone who had stared into the darkest void and found an unwavering light within. Later that night, as they lit old oil lamps within the cozy rooms of the country house, they paused to watch the silver glow of moonlight on the overgrown yard. The newly installed mirror stood in the main room like a silent witness to memories yet to be made. Laura and Sophia settled on makeshift rugs by the fireplace, toasting with cups of tea. They exchanged few words, sharing a comfortable quiet that spoke of completion. Even though new dilemmas surely waited on the horizon, none seemed so frightening as the bottomless unknown they once faced. In returning to the real world, they had been reborn through an ordeal that spanned nightmares and triumphs, reminded at each turn that confronting the darkness within us can illuminate the darkest reflections in the world around us. The peaceful crackle of the fire and distant lullabies of crickets underscored the tale's closure, a testament that where courage exists, no veil of terror can remain unchallenged, and every reflection can give way to the promise of a brighter dawn.